For this experiment, I made 4 pizzas, 3 using my own recipe, and then I made Tony Gemignani's recipe out of the pizza Bible, and I just wanted to size them all up. So for my recipe book, I made my poolish pizza dough recipe, my overnight cold ferment, which is what I call my stock recipe, a 2-night cold ferment, and then Tony G's. So let's dive in. Okay, we've got Tony G's recipe right over here on the far right. This is, I'm not going to go into all the details. I don't want him to get mad at me for violating his copyright, but basically you've got a bulk ferment. We're using active dry yeast, no sugar, and it's a 2-day process. So you mix the dough up the first day, let it ferment in the fridge overnight, about 24 hours, take it out, degas it, shape it into a ball, put it back in the fridge for another day. Next is just a straight up 2-day cold ferment. I mix the ingredients together, let it rest at room temperature for about an hour, shaped it, put it in the fridge where it sat for over 2 days. Next is my stock recipe, which is just an overnight cold ferment. Mix the ingredients, let it rest at room temperature for about an hour, shape the ball, put it in the fridge overnight, and then bake it. And the next is my favorite recipe I've made so far, which is my poolish recipe. And I've done videos on this before, but the poolish in the past has just had so much more flavor than anything else I've done. Now, I baked all these for 3 minutes and 30 seconds in my home oven. You can see some have a darker color than the others. Really, it's these two. My stock recipe, I don't know if you can really tell, but it has larger bubbles, and that's where the darkness is coming from. When the bubbles get too big, the surface of the bubble gets really thin, and it just browns up a lot faster. So let's take a look at the first two, Tony G's recipe versus a 2-day cold ferment. Pretty similar. You can tell that Tony G's, at least I can in person. I don't know if you can picture, I don't know if the camera picks up the depth, but Tony G's has a little more volume to the rim, just a little bit. Now, I should say that my 2-day cold ferment uses sugar, whereas Tony G's is not. And so the first thing I noticed was when I was shaping these two, the 2-day cold ferment with sugar, the dough was a lot more stretchy and elasticy. It shaped really fast. I think that's mainly due to the sugar. Tony G's, I had to really stretch it out more. It's just a little more tougher dough, which is fine. I'm just pointing out the difference. I see my stock recipe. You can tell that that's just a bigger, puffier rim. My poolish, it's not super puffy, but it has some nice bubbles around. So I'm gonna put the camera down and then cut them up and try them, and I'll check back. I wanted to show you what the inside of the rim looks like first. So on the far left is my poolish, which looks exactly like my poolish always does. Larger air bubbles, really nice cell structure. My overnight recipe to the right of it is, a little more dense than the poolish. 2-night ferment, you can see, is larger, has some larger bubbles, larger holes than the overnight recipe, my stock recipe. And then Tony G's, look at that. He's got some really nice big gaps, big bubbles, great cell structure in there. Not quite like the poolish. You can see the poolish is like really stringy. Okay, I'm in the middle of tasting them. I wanted to tell you one thing before I forget. The 2-night recipe here, the 2-night cold ferment on my left, used almost 1/4 of the yeast that Tony's did. It just slowly fermented over the course of 2 days, whereas Tony's swelled up a lot. His recipe book says it should be about 50% bigger when you beat it down a day later, but this was actually like twice as big. It was big and puffy, twice as size. All right, as you can tell, I've eaten a bunch of the crust, just munching on the rims, taste testing. So here are my thoughts. Tony G's over there on the far right. That's the only one that used DMP and had no sugar. The other 3 have sugar. And the taste was really different. In Tony G's book, he talks about how the DMP gives the crust a little bit of a nutty flavor. And I totally get it now. I can taste that now. It is nuttier, not as sweet as the other three. Now, a while back, I did a video similar to this when I was using King Arthur flour. And with King Arthur flour, there was a huge difference between the overnight ferment and the poolish. And with this King, I'm using all Trumps here. With all Trumps, the difference is not that great. If you've been watching my videos, you know that I'm a huge fan of the all Trumps flour. It just tastes so good, has so much flavor. And so what I've learned is from this experiment, I'm going to say that the poolish recipe and the 2-day cold ferment taste very, very similar. As I pointed out earlier, the poolish has a little bit different cell structure, but they're both really lightweight. They both look good, both strong. Very similar crusts. They're pretty identical. If I was going to do a blind taste test, I don't think I can tell the difference. Now, they both taste better than the overnight cold ferment, the one right here. But the taste difference was not that profound as it was with King Arthur flour. If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say that the poolish and the 2-night cold ferment taste maybe 25% better than my overnight recipe. Whereas before with King Arthur flour, I think I said it was like 50% better or more. I can't remember. So that's really what I've learned. I always try to just state my observations. I'll give you my opinion, but it doesn't mean I'm right. I'm not saying one is the best or one is worse. I'm just telling you the differences. I'll tell you which one I like personally, but I don't really say one is better than the other. I'm just saying that Tony G's recipe has a nuttier flavor, and the ones with sugar have a sweeter flavor. I guess it's not too surprising, right? My personal preference, I don't know. I mean, ideally, I think what I'm doing is coming up with a whole arsenal, that a bunch of different recipes that I can pull out for different occasions. If I only have 1 day of prep, I'll just do my overnight recipe. If I have 2 days, then I'll probably just do the 2-night cold ferment because it tastes as good as a poolish. And this is the first time I've made poolish with all Trump's flour. So I was expecting the poolish recipe to be a lot better, like it was with King Arthur, but it's not. It tastes the same to me. So if I have 2 days prep time, then I'll just do the 2-night cold ferment because it's really, really easy recipe. I'll put the recipe in the description if you like. Tony G's recipe, I can appreciate the difference in the crust taste. And with that being said, it was kind of a pain to make. There's a lot of steps. I was using active dry yeast instead of instant yeast. That's another thing. The other three use instant yeast. Tony G's use dry yeast. So I'm proofing it in hot water. Then I mix in the hot water later on with ice cold water. And I'm doing a degassing stage, the second day. It's just a lot more steps than the 2-day cold ferment. So that's it. I'm going to eat all this because it all tastes really good. I'm going to pop back in the oven to warm up, crisp up a little bit more, and then I'm going to stuff my face with pizza. Let me know what you think. I don't know how well I articulated it when I was filming the pizza as I was eating it, so I just wanted to add this little bit. When I first started this channel, I found out that out of the grocery store brands of flour, King Arthur bread flour was my favorite by far to use for pizza dough. They had the strength and the best taste. And so that's what I was using. And as I was doing experiments, I learned that the overnight cold ferment in the fridge tasted a lot better than the same-day pizza dough. And the 3-day cold ferment tasted better than the overnight cold ferment. But when I made the poolish recipe, it was like 50% better than the 3-night cold ferment. It was just so good. It had so much flavor. It was sweeter, just didn't have that bitter aftertaste at all. And I was kind of expecting the same out of my All Trumps flour here that I've been using the last few months. I'm using All Trumps unbleached flour, and when I first started using it, I was really blown away by how much better it tasted than King Arthur. It just was more flavorful, it was sweeter, and just all around more flavorful in my book. And when I did this experiment today, I didn't see the same disparity as I did King Arthur flour. It wasn't even close. I mean, I did the the overnight cold ferment, my stock recipe, and then the 2-day cold ferment and the poolish recipe. And the disparity between those three was very small, actually. Um, very small. I mean, the poolish and the 2-day ferment tasted pretty much identical to me. They had a little bit different characteristics in the crust and the rim, but they're both very strong, very lightweight and crispy and very good tasting. But there just wasn't much or any difference in taste. And the truth is, they didn't taste all that much better. I mean, it tasted better than the overnight cold ferment, but not that much better. Maybe 15 to 20% better or something. I think I said 25% earlier, but that might have been a little generous. So noticeably better, but still, not a huge gap. And so really as I've been thinking about this, what I'm thinking is basically whatever flour you're using, because every flour is going to have a little different characteristics and a little different taste, you're going to have to basically tailor your recipe to that type of flour. So what I'm doing now is I'm creating a toolbox of different recipes. There's just not one way to make pizza dough. It's really going to depend on what you're looking for and the type of flour you have. And so I just wanted to add that. Thanks.